There is a moment right before you speak when you still have all the power. The second the words leave your mouth, you give some of it away. Most people never notice this moment. They rush through it. They fill every silence like it's a debt that needs to be paid immediately. But the most dangerous people in history, the most respected leaders, the ones who made entire rooms go quiet when they finally spoke, understood something the rest of us were never taught. They understood that silence is not empty, silence is loaded, and the person who can hold it longest usually wins. Think about the last time someone insulted you, or challenged you, or tried to provoke a reaction out of you in front of other people. What did you do? If you're like most people, you felt the heat rise in your chest, and within a second or two, words came pouring out of you, defending yourself, explaining yourself, trying to win an argument that was never really about winning. And in that exact moment, you handed the other person exactly what they wanted, not because you lost the argument, but because you proved that a few words from them could control your entire nervous system. This is the paradox almost nobody talks about. We live in a culture that worships expression. Say what's on your mind, speak your truth, don't hold back. And there's real value in honesty, in communication, in being seen. But somewhere along the way, we confused expression with impulse. We started believing that every thought deserves a voice, that every insult deserves a comeback, that every silence is a void that must be filled before it becomes uncomfortable. And in doing that, we gave away one of the oldest and most powerful tools a human being can hold, the ability to say nothing on purpose. At exactly the right moment, Niccolo Machiavelli spent his life studying power, not power as people imagine it, thrones and armies and grand speeches, but power as it operates, in quiet rooms, behind closed doors, in the small moments where one person decides to react and another decides to wait. He watched princes rise and fall, not because they lacked ambition, but because they lacked restraint. He watched men lose everything because they couldn't resist proving a point, defending their pride, or reacting to an insult in the moment it was thrown. And he watched the ones who endured, the ones who actually kept power for decades, and he noticed something almost invisible. They said less, far less, and when they did speak, it mattered more. If you're interested in understanding psychology, mastering yourself, and seeing the world the way strategists and psychologists actually see it, this is exactly the kind of thing we explore every week on Psychology Unlocked. So if this is the first time you're here, consider subscribing, because what you're about to learn in the next few minutes is something most people go their entire lives without ever understanding. Let's start with something almost everyone has experienced but rarely examines: the urge to defend yourself. Someone criticizes your work in a meeting. Someone questions your decision in front of your family. Someone makes a comment designed to get under your skin. In that moment, your body reacts before your mind does. Your heart rate increases. Your face gets warm. There's a pressure building in your chest that feels like it needs release. And the only release your brain can imagine is speaking, explaining, defending, correcting the record immediately, right there, right now, before another second passes. But here's the uncomfortable truth Machiavelli understood centuries before modern psychology gave it a name. That urge isn't wisdom. It's a nervous system responding to a perceived threat. It's the same mechanism that made our ancestors freeze or fight when a predator appeared, except now the predator is a comment at a table, and the fight is verbal instead of physical. The problem is, most people mistake this reaction for strength. They think speaking quickly, defending fast, having the last word means they've won. In reality, it usually means they've been controlled. Someone said a sentence, and within seconds, that sentence hijacked their entire emotional state and forced a response out of them like a puppet on a string. Powerful people learn to notice this string before it pulls them. They feel the same heat in their chest. They're human, not machines. But instead of letting the reaction fire immediately, they create a gap, a pause, a breath. And in that gap, something remarkable happens. The urgency fades, the need to defend themselves starts to look, even to them, a little unnecessary. And what's left, after the urgency fades, is a choice, not a reaction. A choice. This is the first psychological principle behind the power of saying nothing. Silence creates space between stimulus and response, and in that space lives your actual power. Anyone can react. A dog reacts when you raise your voice. A child reacts when you take away a toy. Reaction is the most basic, most primitive function of a nervous system. But a considered silence, a deliberate pause before you decide whether words are even necessary, that is something only a disciplined mind can produce. And the moment you master that gap, people around you start to feel it. They sense that you are not an easy target for emotional manipulation. They sense that provoking you doesn't work the way it works on everyone else. And without you saying a single word about it, your reputation begins to shift. Now let's go deeper, because there's a second layer to this that most people never see, and it's even more important than emotional control. Silence doesn't just protect you, it reveals other people. Picture a negotiation. Two people sitting across a table, discussing terms of a deal. One person is anxious to fill every pause. The moment there's quiet, they start talking again, adding details, justifying their position, sweetening the offer without even being asked. The other person says very little. They let pauses stretch a few seconds longer than feels comfortable. And what happens almost every single time? The anxious talker starts revealing more than they intended. They fill the silence with information the other side never had to ask for. They negotiate against themselves. This isn't a coincidence. And it isn't manipulation in some sinister sense either. It's simply how human beings are wired. Silence makes most people uncomfortable, and discomfort makes people talk. The person who can sit inside that discomfort without rushing to end it gains an enormous advantage. Not because they're tricking anyone, but because they're simply not participating in the anxious performance everyone else feels pressured to give. Machiavelli understood this instinctively when he wrote about how a wise ruler reveals as little of his true thinking as possible, while encouraging others through patience and careful listening to reveal everything about theirs. Think about how this shows up in your own life. In a job interview, the candidate who answers a question and then stops, resisting the urge to keep adding qualifiers and justifications, comes across as far more confident than the one who can't stop explaining themselves. In a friendship, the person who listens far more than they speak often becomes the person everyone trusts with their secrets, because people can feel that their words are safe, not because that person promised confidentiality, but because their silence has already proven it. In a family disagreement, the parent or sibling who states their position once and then goes quiet often ends up far more respected than the one who repeats themselves 5 times, trying to win the argument through sheer volume of words. There's a reason for this that goes beyond etiquette. Every word you speak is data. It tells people what you value, what upsets you, what you're afraid of, what you're trying to protect. Most people give this data away for free, constantly, without even realizing they're doing it. They think they're just being honest, or friendly, or expressive. But underneath, they're handing out a map of their own psychology to anyone paying attention. The people who understand strategic silence aren't cold or secretive by nature. They've simply learned that not everyone has earned access to that map, and that giving it away indiscriminately is a form of self-sabotage disguised as openness. This is where a lot of people get uncomfortable, and it's worth addressing directly, because it's an important distinction. Strategic silence is not the same as suppression. It's not about bottling up your emotions until they explode, and it's not about becoming distant, secretive, or manipulative with the people who genuinely matter to you. There's a difference between choosing not to react to a provocation and refusing to communicate with someone who loves you. One is self-control, the other is emotional avoidance. Machiavelli wasn't teaching princes to become hollow or disconnected from the people around them. He was teaching them to be deliberate, to choose when their words would matter most, instead of scattering them carelessly in every direction, at every provocation, to every person who happened to be in the room. Let's talk about a situation almost everyone has lived through. You're at work, and a colleague takes credit for something you contributed. Maybe it's subtle, a small omission in a meeting, a slightly misleading email to the team. Every instinct in your body wants to correct it immediately, publicly, right there in front of everyone. And sometimes that instinct is right, but often, especially in professional settings, immediate emotional correction backfires. It makes you look petty. It makes you look insecure. It shifts the story from "this person did something wrong" to "look how upset this other person got." The moment shifts away from the injustice and onto your emotional reaction, and suddenly you're the one being discussed at the water cooler. Now picture the alternative. You say nothing in the moment. You let it pass calmly, without a flicker of visible frustration. But later you address it directly, privately, with the person responsible. Or you simply make sure your future work is documented in a way that speaks for itself without needing an argument at all. No dramatic confrontation, no public defense, just quiet, deliberate correction of the record over time. Which version of you do you think earns more respect in that office over the following year? Which version of you do people start describing as hard to read and always in control, the highest compliment power can receive in a professional environment? This is the third principle hiding inside the power of saying nothing. Restraint in the moment doesn't mean weakness. It means you're playing a longer game than the people around you. Impulsive people are playing for the next 30 seconds. They want the satisfaction of the comeback, the relief of getting the last word, the temporary high of feeling like they won. But power rarely lives in the next 30 seconds. It lives in reputations built over months and years, in the slow accumulation of trust, respect, and quiet authority that comes from being someone whose words are never wasted. And this brings us to something almost paradoxical, something that took me a long time to fully understand. The less frequently a person speaks, the more weight their words carry when they finally do. Think about the people in your life who talk constantly, who have an opinion on every topic, who fill every silence in every conversation. After a while, you stop truly listening to them. Their words become background noise, present but not particularly important, because there's simply so much of it. Now think about someone who rarely offers an opinion, who listens far more than they speak, who chooses their moments carefully. When that person finally says something, the entire room leans in. Their scarcity of words has created value around every single one of them. This is basic psychology, the same principle that governs supply and demand in any market. Abundance reduces value, scarcity increases it. Words are no different. A person who speaks constantly is flooding the market with a currency that quickly loses meaning. A person who speaks rarely and only when it matters is operating with a currency that remains strong precisely because it's rare. Machiavelli understood that a ruler who spoke constantly, who explained every decision, who justified every choice to every critic, would eventually be seen as weak, desperate for approval, uncertain of his own authority. But a ruler who spoke rarely, who let his actions do most of the talking, and who reserved his words for moments that truly required them, was seen as someone operating from a position of quiet, unshakable confidence. There's another layer to this worth exploring, one that touches something deeply personal for most people watching this. Many of us were taught, somewhere in childhood, that silence meant something was wrong. A silent parent might have meant disapproval. A silent friend might have meant rejection. A silent partner might have meant the relationship was in trouble. And so many people grow into adulthood carrying an unconscious belief that silence itself is dangerous, that any pause in conversation is a threat that must be filled immediately with words, reassurance, jokes, explanations, anything to make the discomfort go away. If this describes you, it's worth sitting with for a moment, not with judgment, but with curiosity, because the instinct to fill every silence isn't a character flaw. It's usually a survival strategy that made sense once in an earlier chapter of your life, when silence really did signal danger, but that survival strategy carried unconsciously into adulthood, into your career, into your relationships, into your negotiations, can quietly work against you for the rest of your life if you never examine it. The goal isn't to suppress the discomfort silence brings up. The goal is to notice it, understand where it comes from, and slowly build the capacity to sit inside it anyway, because on the other side of that discomfort is a level of self-control most people never reach. Here's something worth thinking about the next time you feel that pull to speak too quickly. Ask yourself one simple question before the words come out. Does this need to be said right now by me in this exact moment? Sometimes the answer is yes, and when it is, speak clearly and directly, without hesitation. But far more often than we'd like to admit, the honest answer is no. The words we're about to say are driven by discomfort, not necessity. They're an attempt to relieve our own tension, rather than to communicate something the moment actually requires. Learning to spot that difference in real time is one of the most valuable psychological skills a person can develop, and almost nobody is ever taught to look for it. Let's bring this into another part of life where it matters enormously, and where most people get it exactly backwards: relationships. When a partner says something hurtful, or a friend crosses a line, or a family member says something manipulative during an argument, the instinct is almost always to respond immediately, matching their energy, defending yourself point by point, trying to win the exchange in real time. But arguments fueled by immediate emotional reaction rarely resolve anything. They escalate. Two nervous systems, both flooded with adrenaline, both trying to prove a point, rarely produce clarity. They produce noise. The people who navigate conflict most effectively The ones whose relationships tend to last, whose friendships tend to deepen instead of fracture, have usually learned a version of the same lesson we've been building throughout this entire video. They don't suppress their feelings. They don't pretend nothing happened, but they create distance between the moment something hurtful is said and the moment they respond to it. Sometimes that distance is a few seconds. Sometimes it's a walk around the block. Sometimes it's literally sleeping on it and returning to the conversation the next day with a clear head instead of a flooded nervous system. And in that distance, something happens that immediate reaction never allows. Clarity. The ability to see what was actually said, why it might have been said, and what response would actually serve the relationship, instead of simply serving the ego in the heat of the moment. This is worth pausing on, because it directly connects to something Machiavelli wrote about that people often misunderstand. He's remembered unfairly as someone who taught cruelty and manipulation for their own sake. But if you actually study his writing carefully, what he consistently praised wasn't cruelty, it was self-control. A ruler who acted purely on emotion, who lashed out the instant he felt threatened, who couldn't resist the temptation to prove his strength through impulsive action, was, in Machiavelli's eyes, weak, no matter how much power he technically held. The rulers he admired most were the ones who could feel anger, feel threatened, feel the same emotions as everyone else, and still choose their response deliberately, based on strategy rather than impulse. Saying nothing in his framework wasn't the absence of strength. It was strength itself, quietly disguised as patience. Now here's where this becomes genuinely fascinating, and it's something worth sitting with for a moment. Every time you resist the urge to react immediately, you're not just protecting yourself in that single moment. You're training your nervous system, slowly, conversation by conversation, to trust that you can survive discomfort without needing to escape it through words. This is the same mechanism that builds confidence in any area of life. Confidence isn't the absence of fear. It's proof, gathered through repeated experience, that you can face something uncomfortable and come out the other side intact. Every time you sit through an awkward silence instead of rushing to fill it, every time you let an insult pass without an immediate comeback, every time you resist explaining yourself to someone who was never going to listen anyway, you're building evidence in your own mind that you don't need to react to survive. And that evidence becomes the foundation of a kind of confidence that no motivational speech could ever manufacture for you. There's one more piece of this puzzle worth exploring before we bring everything together, and it might be the most practical insight of the entire video. Not all silence is created equal. There's a version of silence that's cold, distant, and designed to punish someone, the kind of silence people use in relationships to make another person feel small or anxious, waiting for an apology or a concession. That version of silence isn't strength, it's a different kind of manipulation, and it usually damages relationships far more than it protects them. Then there's another version of silence, calm, grounded, and simply patient, where you're not punishing anyone, you're not trying to make someone anxious, you're simply choosing not to give an immediate reaction because you understand that your next words matter more than your next few seconds of relief. The difference between these two versions of silence comes down to intention. One comes from a place of control over yourself. The other comes from a desire to control someone else through withholding. Learning to recognize which one you're practicing in real time is essential, because the goal of everything we've discussed in this video was never to teach you to become distant or manipulative with the people you care about. The goal was to help you reclaim a kind of self-command that most people never develop, so that your words, when you do choose to speak, actually mean something, instead of being one more reaction, lost in a world that's already drowning in noise. So here's the final thought I want to leave you with, because I think it captures everything we've explored today into a single idea worth remembering. Every time you feel the pressure to speak, to explain, to defend, to react, ask yourself if that pressure is coming from wisdom or from discomfort. Most of the time, if you're honest with yourself, it's discomfort. And the moment you learn to sit inside that discomfort, calmly, without rushing to escape it through words, you gain access to a kind of power most people will never experience in their entire lives. Not the power of having the last word, not the power of winning every argument, but the quiet, unshakable power of a person whose silence is a choice, not a fear, and whose words, when they finally arrive, land exactly where they're meant to land. Which idea from this video challenged the way you think the most? Was it the idea that silence reveals other people more than it hides you? Was it the realization that every word you speak carelessly is information you're giving away for free? Or was it the understanding that restraint, not reaction, is where real power actually lives? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm always fascinated by which part of these videos hits closest to home for different people. If this video changed the way you think about silence even a little, share it with someone who reacts too quickly, who explains too much, who gives away their power one impulsive sentence at a time. Because sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone isn't advice. It's a different way of seeing something they've been doing their entire life without ever questioning it. The next time you feel the heat rising in your chest, the next time someone says something designed to provoke a reaction, remember this moment. Remember that you have a choice most people never realize they have. You can react the way everyone expects you to, or you can pause, breathe, and let the silence work in your favor, the way the most powerful, most respected, most quietly confident people throughout history have always understood long before anyone ever wrote it down.